Welcome back, YouTube, to Icy Chap's Edge. I'm Icy Chap, here with another knife review, this time looking at the Cold Steel Peacekeeper 2. And this is what I would characterize as an urban fighting knife, and unfortunately it's no longer available from Cold Steel. They're not making it anymore. But you can find it. I actually purchased this in a knife store. You can probably find them on eBay, and possibly some online knife shops may carry it. Before I get into the specifics of this knife, I do want to talk about the terms tactical knife and fighting knife, because unfortunately in a lot of YouTube knife review videos I think those terms are interchanged incorrectly. Simply speaking, a tactical knife and a fighting knife are two different things. A tactical knife is really a combat utility knife. What that means is, in addition to being useful for fighting, a combat utility knife needs to be useful for other tactics, hence the name. Those tactics may include prying objects like opening up ammunition cases, breaching doors, cutting tougher materials like various kinds of cordage, different fabrics, possibly even wire, and a combat utility knife needs to function as a survival blade if the need should arise. A fighting knife, on the other hand, does not need any of that utility. A fighting knife is designed for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is for killing people. A fighting knife should be useful for slashing open blood vessels, cutting muscles and tendons, and piercing and penetrating vital organs. And those considerations are what should lead to the fighting knife design. Now, there is a subcategory, or two subcategories within fighting knives, and those are urban fighting knives and military fighting knives. And the key difference is that military fighting knives need to be longer and heavier and made of tougher materials. And that's simply because they need to penetrate military coverings. And those coverings can include battle uniforms, military webbing, vests, and possibly even body armor. And once you start getting that many layers and that thickness, you need to be able to penetrate all of that and still have enough blade length left over to penetrate vital organs. You need the blade to be made of tougher materials because it needs to be able to withstand all of those substances as it passes through to your opponent. With urban fighting knives, you don't need them to be that long. You want the blade to be lighter and smaller for concealability and ease of carry, and you want the knife to be fast for close quarter combat. You're not penetrating the same types of coverings. They're going to be lighter and thinner. Usually you're only going to be encountering basic clothing. And probably the most important consideration as the difference between urban and military fighting knives is an urban fighting knife only needs to work once. You need to survive that one encounter and defeat your opponent or escape. And a military fighting knife may need to be used over and over and over again. But the urban fighting knife does not have that need. So with that in mind, let's consider the Cold Steel Peacekeeper 2. Why is this such an excellent urban fighting knife? Well, first let's consider carry. It's got a great sheath. It's hard plastic, very durable. It has rivets and slots which are going to accommodate not only a belt or webbing, but it's going to accommodate a tech lock or molly locks. It also has a very rigid, hard, and removable clip. The sheath itself is very light and thin, and ultimately you can carry this knife in any fashion you choose. My personal favorite would be horizontally on the back of my belt in the small of my back. And it's going to be very secure there. Using a tech lock, it's not going to migrate, and I'm going to be able to retrieve the knife at a moment's notice. In addition, the sheath has excellent retention. The knife does come out smoothly, but when it's locked in, there's absolutely no movement, and you will never lose this knife because it comes out of the sheath inadvertently. So great sheath for carry, very lightweight, offers a lot of options. And let's turn to the blade design now. First thing to notice, it has that great dagger shape, which I personally feel is ideal for a fighting knife. For a couple reasons. Number one, you got the bevel down the middle, grind on either side, on both sides of the blade. That creates a very thin, very sharp tip. Not a very rugged tip. I wouldn't use that tip for any kind of prying or digging, but I only need it to stab. So for its intended purpose, that sharp, thin tip is virtually ideal. It's very thin, which means it's going to offer very little friction, very little resistance as it hopefully goes into my opponent. That's really my most important concern. Also, it has a hollow ground to it. Again, not a very rugged edge, but very, very sharp. This knife is razor sharp because of it. Even though it's not the greatest steel, it's that Krupp stainless steel that Cold Steel uses on some of its knives, but it doesn't need to be rugged. I only need this knife to be effective for one fight. And for that reason, the Krupp steel is actually a good choice. It's not very dense, it's very lightweight, and it's stainless, which means I can leave this knife sitting around for years, not worry about it rusting or corroding. When I pull this knife out, it is going to stay sharp, and it's going to be ready when I need it. Other thing to note about that blade design is that it has good sweep on both sides. Some dagger shapes are straight on both sides, and I actually think that's not an effective style of blade for fighting. You want this to be an effective slashing knife. Because it's double-edged and both edges have a good sweep, this knife is going to be effective for more techniques. I'm going to have more options when fighting because I have two edges. That's simply better in all conditions. Looking at the handle, first thing to note, it's made of kraton, which is deeply checkered. It's going to give me a very effective grip, whether it gets wet from blood, sweat, water, whatever. It's also swelled, and that is effective for fighting for two reasons. One, it fills the hand and it's very comfortable. And two, no matter which direction I pull the knife, I'm going to have good purchase on it because it's swelled in the middle. Whether I'm pushing forward on a stab or pulling out to retract my knife, I'm going to have a good grip because of that handle shape. Also, the handle shapes into this double guard, which is made of the kraton. I don't know how effective it's going to be at deflecting incoming knife attacks, but realistically for urban combat, I'm almost never going to encounter a knife-on-knife fight. So that is much less important. Oh, one other thing to mention about the blade design, that Krupp steel doesn't have any black finish on it, which I feel is important for providing a deterrent. If I pull this knife out, it's pretty intimidating. Hopefully that's going to be enough to get my attacker away from me. They're going to lose interest. They're not going to want to engage me because I'm showing some resistance. So I think that's effective as well. Turning back to that flared double guard, the main reason I think that's there, why it's important, is because on a hard stab, even though the kraton is very grippy, I want that added protection that's going to prevent my fingers from going over that edge and cutting myself. So, great handle design. Only one hit against the knife, and that is, I believe they could have removed some of this kraton, exposing some metal, and giving me a pommel. I really would like to see a spike-shaped pommel, which gives me another striking surface, and would ultimately make this a much more effective weapon. So, there you have it. The Cold Steel Peacekeeper 2, it's very lightweight at about 5.6 ounces. I think it has pretty much the ideal length for an urban fighting knife. I don't think it's long enough for a military fighting knife, but again, the knife is really designed for its intended purpose. And I think it would serve that purpose extremely well. I give this knife a very high 9 out of 10. Only hit against it again is that it doesn't have that exposed metal for a pommel. I hope you enjoyed my review. You can leave comments, subscribe, and have a good one.